I want to start with the issue of staff morale. And I'm doing this because at the moment, the country is watching visuals of Nehao workers protesting on the streets. We know what that has meant for the power utility in the past, where workers there go on a strike and suddenly we have load shedding that is going out of control. In your own words, how would you describe staff morale at Eskom?
Firstly, thank you very much for having us here, and good day to you and your listeners. Firstly, the matter of staff morale for the board is a very crucial matter.
Yeah.
You may even recall our first discussion virtually last year, October, when you interviewed me for the first time, when I said that in our humble consideration, it is not spreadsheets that turn places around its people.
Yeah.
And so we want, firstly, Eskom employees to know that the board holds them in the highest level of respect. The first thing that I did over and above engaging the executive colleagues on EXCO that we engaged with recently, 3 weeks ago, I consulted with the top leadership forum in Eskom. That's almost like the top 500 decision makers, just to hear from them what their concerns are that we as the board need to be mindful of as we go about executing our fiduciary responsibilities. The thing that I would appeal to Eskom staff on today is to be mindful of our values, the Eskom values. We have a set of values called the ZISKI values. The first Z in the ZISKI stands for zero harm, and I'll just stick to zero harm out of the values. We must see zero harm as something of crucial value to us as Eskom and the country.
Yeah.
Which means as we go about our roles, we do zero harm to the environment. Most importantly, we do zero harm to each other because we are driven by safety. So we should all arrive safe at work and leave safe for home. Thirdly, in terms of Eskom assets, we should do zero harm, which means we must shy away from corruption. We must shy away from any acts that could do harm to the utility.
Yeah.
So I would appeal to Eskom employees to always embrace the first value of zero harm in its totality.
Yeah.
And out of the other values, I want to pick on one last value, the S in the ZISKI, which is Sinobuntu. I think the biggest challenge now addressing those in Eskom who manage other people, it is imperative that our humanity, in terms of how we lead and manage people on the ground, how we lead and manage the culture of the organization, that we don't forget. In fact, let's go and reignite that sense of Sinobuntu.
I'm going to have to hurry us along because we have much to discuss and very little time. The reason I asked you about staff morale, in part, is because I spoke to one of the leaders of the unions that organize at Eskom, General Secretary of NUMSA, Irvin Jim. And I don't want to speak for him. Let's just listen to what he had to say.
Eskom workers are permanently under siege, under attack. They are presented as thieves by this government as a result of shenanigans that takes place around power stations where they work. So obviously, we dealing with the workforce that is in a state of a very low morale. And unfortunately, where you would have expected decisive action on the side of government to arrest this rolling blackout, it has not been our experience.
Low staff morale at Eskom. You agree with that sentiment?
It is to be expected that there would be low morale. I think, firstly, from where Mr. Jim sits and all the other leaders at the national secretariat level of the unions, it's imperative that they reach out at least to the Group Chief Executive's office. Currently, Mr. Caleb Kasim is the interim Group Chief Executive. and seek to have a conversation of a partnership nature. I'm saying this because the average Eskom employee, unionized or not, is under siege. It's correct. It's under siege from a perspective of their children get bullied at school. They're under siege from the perspective of their wives in most communities struggle to mingle with fellow members of communities because their husbands or their spouses, if on the other side, if it's a male spouse, are seen as letting the country down in terms of load shedding. So you get picked upon at every corner. Rather than go on national television and bemoan the situation, let's all sit around the same table and say, as partners, because trade unions are partners to their management counterparts in the workplace.
Yeah.
Let's sit as partners and say, how do we together turn this place around? At least I'm encouraged because someone like him would recall back to 2001 when Eskom used to be the best employer in the country when it was Power Utility of the Year. Let's go back there and find out how we can together rekindle this place as a great place to work, as a great place that delivers electricity with pride to the nation.
I'm glad you've touched on it yourself, that it's not for you to come to a television station and talk about staff morale, but it's got to be done on the ground. And so it leads me to my next question. Have you, as the board or through management, had a talk with your staff since the departure of Andre de Ruyter to say to them, do you have any concerns that we may need to address? Because as some people have it, we are headed toward a winter of discontent. And the last people this country wants upset and going on strike, it is those workers at Eskom.
So, straight answer is yes. We've had 3 virtual conversations with our staff because to get them all 49,000 under one roof, you'd need a stadium. So we've had virtual conversations. I've also had a leadership talk. There's a tool from my old days as a change management advisor. There's a tool called Celebrate What's Right with Your World, which is about saying to have energy to fix what's wrong in an organization, you've got to also celebrate what is working. We intend to continue that. That now addresses the top forum with the hope that in turn they will share those insights with their staff. It is something we intend to do ongoing. But remember this, that the key driver of any interaction internally has to come from the Chief Executive's office together with the Human Capital Executive. So as board members, it would be untoward of us from good governance point of view to bypass those two and engage directly with staff. So we would always come as guests of management, particularly myself and the chair of the Human Capital and Rewards Committee. But certainly we've already had those kind of interactions, and we intend to have more with time.
At some point you touched on the issue of corruption. A recent media report cited estimates of between 70 to 80% of Eskom staff as being corrupt. Are these reports accurate? And if indeed they are accurate, what are you doing about it?
So firstly, it can't be that 80% of Eskom staff are corrupt. It just can't be. Why am I saying this? In the build-up to Eskom appearing before the State Capture Commission, before we were even on the scene as board members, the Eskom executive team led by Mr. De Ruyter went to the State Capture Commission and presented what was being done in Eskom already at that time, 18 months or so ago. And they emerged from that, the transcripts are there, they emerged from that with the Commission applauding them for the proactive manner in which they were dealing with this. So what has been done? Firstly, within management, there is a state capture task team led by the head of legal who's a new Eskom person. So again, you can't say they're biased because maybe they grew up in Eskom. They've been in Eskom for less than 3 years. And she leads, together with the EXCO, a task team that has been on a journey of cleaning up any remnants of wrongdoing that they could come across.
Yeah.
And it is because of that task team that today you've had 3 board members, former board members, being arrested. 2 of them have had assets forfeited. You also have 2 former chief executives of Eskom currently in court. You've got a former CFO of Eskom who has been stripped of his rights as a chartered accountant, and many others that have been reported, former directors, that have been reported to the CPIC, the authority that registers and deregisters directors, for them to be deemed as delinquent directors. So in terms of management, those are the examples of what is being done. Secondly, outside in, there's an independent law firm that has been appointed that is working with Eskom on creating, in the country we've got something called the Financial Intelligence Center. So they are replicating some of the examples of a financial intelligence center to create an internal anti-corruption center where we'll have intelligence within Eskom to know early on if there's patterns that show that an employee, a manager, a director could end up being corrupt. Thirdly, as board members, as EXCO members, we are not in any way allowed to be part of Eskom and do business with Eskom. Sometimes you find people there on the board, but on the side they've got this tender, that tender with the organization on whose board they serve. For us, it's a no-no. Now we're even taking it a step further. Just last point. We're taking it a step further. We're going to do, in the banks, we've got what we call third-party annual review. We're going to do a related party annual review. So, for instance, now, as chair of the board, I can't be chair of the board and you find that my wife or my daughter or my son or whoever else in my family are doing business with Eskom. And we've seen this in the past also, in the previous dispensation at Eskom. So no board member, no EXCO member will have their immediate family do business with Eskom, and this will be reviewed annually. If you have a brother, a sister, or somebody like that who does business with Eskom, that will also be reviewed and disclosed, and it will not be encouraged either. Because, again, I can be on the board, share vital information with my cousin and my brother, and they do business with Eskom, and then I raise my hand and say, no, I'm clean, I'm not doing business with Eskom. So we want to have a board leadership and EXCO leadership that are above reproach in any way you can look at it.
Talking about Eskom workers or Eskom officials who are doing business with the utility, are former workers who have been fired for illegal conduct, possibly corruption. Those people are said to be finding their way back into Eskom, but through the procurement department at Eskom, and they are emerging as contractors. Are you aware of this?
So before you kind of respectfully ask me to pause for you to ask this question, the next point I was going to go to is in December 2022, and in the 3rd week of January 22, we appeared before SCOPA, together with the SIU, together with the Hawks. Both the Hawks, the general head of the Hawks, General Lebeya, Advocate Mutiba from SA, both of them led comprehensive presentations to Parliament, to SCOPA, where, for instance, in the case of the SIU, they showed that they have been combing through the employee database at Eskom, and they showed where there were thousands of employees that firstly worked at Eskom with undeclared interests, and where they have been systematically eradicating that, and where there may well have been employees who had declared interests but had not declared fully. And they were also indicating there, independent of the Eskom management, that some had gone through disciplinary hearings, some have gone through dismissals, and that there's a post-employment checklist that they've got in place with Eskom management. In fact, there was a public statement released jointly by Eskom and the SIU in May 2022 in this regard, where they were showcasing how they were ensuring that you can't have that happening anymore. Naturally, when you're going through a legacy of undoing these wrongdoings, some may well slip through the cracks. But I assure you that it is on the radar screen of management, it is on the radar screen of the board, because on an interval basis, we have to appear before SCOPA. And they're quite thorough in checking what we reported prior and what we're coming forth with to see whether there's progress. So from where we sit as the board, since we came into office in October last year, we are comfortable that there's momentum in this regard, and we are committed to ensuring that we don't slide. We continue to put pressure on the system to ensure that Eskom remains squeaky clean. So back to the morale matter. It is important that we don't generalize about people, because imagine you're a good citizen of South Africa, you're an employee at Eskom, and you're lumped with the statement, I don't know whence it comes, of 80% of Eskom employees could be corrupt. So we have a duty, all of us, in terms of our public utterances and in terms of our media engagements, to ensure that we encourage good citizens in Eskom to continue to be men and women of worth their salt, because we need them to keep their heads high every morning to go to work and keep our lights on.
Mr. Makwana, let's pause there for a moment. We're going to take a break. When we return, we pick up on the issue of corruption. Yes, we're edging closer to load shedding. I know you're waiting for that. We're going to touch on that when we return. If you're just joining us, we are in conversation with the chairperson of the Eskom board, Mpho Makwana. Mr. Makwana, I want to quickly deal with the matters of corruption and put them aside, because there's other issues we need to discuss. The elephant in the room for people who are watching this and they're wondering, the recent CEO at Eskom said there are 4 cartels who are operating in the area of Mpumalanga, and they are looting this utility, a utility that's already on its knees. Are you aware of this information?
So firstly, let's correct that. Is the former group CEO, because he's no longer at Eskom. When he was at Eskom, he was part of a whole host of processes I've just cited earlier, with the work being done together with the Hawks. If you know, for instance, publicly it's been reported that Eskom has recovered in excess of 2 billion rands from more than 5 multinationals who were in cahoots with all manner of wrongdoers in Eskom. That is not a closed project, it's an ongoing project, and this 3 billion recovery happened under Mr. Dreiter's watch. So what he may have divulged on the television interview that he had the other day was not anything new that was not already in the public domain under the investigations of the Hawks.
Yeah.
It is said that in the manner that he came across, it was as if he had just made a new discovery on the occasion of the interview.
Well, what was new?
So that's the first thing.
What was new, Mr. Makwana, and I'm sorry to cut in, what was new was the information he subsequently reveals, that it's possible that there are certain ministers that are working in cahoots with these cartels. Is that information at Eskom's disposal? That
information was never shared with the board. That information was never discussed in any formal forum of Eskom.
Why not?
He's the best person to respond. What we know now is somebody, somewhere, unbeknown to us, has been funding a private investigation process that he's been leading outside of the law enforcement authorities. So he needs to take the South African public into his confidence in terms, firstly, who funded it, because we're talking millions of funding. He needs to share the outcome of that investigation with law enforcement agencies. so that both the country, through the NECOM, the National Energy Crisis Committee, which we participate in, which he was a member of, we can then divulge that to the cluster of law enforcement agencies, and he can then also take that to the relevant police station so that those people can be arrested.
When did you become aware of this private investigation, and can you state on the record that it has not been funded with Eskom funds?
We've just now learned of these initiatives in a matter of weeks past.
After his departure?
After his departure. We don't have any traces in Eskom that shows that millions were spent. He himself mentioned the name of the firm that he's been working with in these investigations, if you go back to that interview. And so it is incumbent upon him to disclose fully who the backers were that funded this private initiative of investigating a national utility outside of law enforcement authorities, when inside NECOM we have direct access to all you can think of, the Minister of Police, the Minister that leads the Intelligence Security Forces, the Minister that leads correction. Anybody in the law enforcement cluster Eskom has access to through NECOM. We've got the door open for us to report anything that we come across. I've just said that even the Hawks, when we go to Parliament, they meet with Eskom legal teams regularly to compare notes on progress against various cases that have been opened, that are out there in the public domain. I can tell you now that there's more than 200 arrests that have been made. And these are known to the Hawks, they are known to our police services. And so it is really saddening that he's sitting on this vital information that was done privately with this private agency, that he didn't then see it fit to bring forth to the legitimate law enforcement agencies in our country.
Sure. Let's talk load shedding. We have had rolling blackouts since the beginning of this year. Are we due for a reprieve?
We have shared a turnaround plan that we continue to monitor as the board. And we continue to be satisfied that, tough as it is, as we implement this turnaround plan, progress is being made, edging us closer to ensuring that the key things that trigger load shedding, unplanned capacity loss vector, that we're beginning to see a program, clear program from the Eskom management of how we're dealing with that. As early as yesterday, we were shared with a presentation that shows how our internal engineers are looking also at key manufacturing elements that ensure that all your boilers, your router, all the key components in the basic plant environment are being scheduled for replacement. In fact, we've got capacity within Rotec to even manufacture some of these replacement parts. So we are comfortable that we are on track. We are comfortable that also with stronger, better leadership, the Eskom team will edge closer. Right now we're busy with the search for the group chief executive, and we hope that in a matter of months we should be able to emerge with a new body that will lead Eskom. In the generation space, the new chief generations officer role, we have already shortlisted. Interviews are underway. And so we're comfortable that based on what we're observing 6 months into our term, there's an element of leaders that are technically strong, that have boots on the ground, because that's very important.
Yeah.
The person who runs the control room in a power station that's called a controller looking at different units must feel the presence of the chief generations officer, must feel the presence of the chief executive in their lives on a regular basis. Together with their cluster managers and their power station managers. We've got the Board Operations Performance Committee led by Dr. Mteto Nyati that is doing exceptionally well. This is all the engineers and technical members of our board that meet regularly with the technical universe in Eskom to ensure that we edge closer to improving the energy availability factor.
Mr. Makwana, my question to you, I know I've given you this latitude to explain. Let me cut to the chase. We're going into a winter. We've never seen load shedding this bad in the country. The simple question is, how bad is it going to get this winter?
We can't give you a how bad answer today, for the simple reason that the week-to-week forecast of load shedding is shifting as we improve. Whether it's parts replacements, whether it's the different maintenance schedules that are ensuring that other units are coming back off stream. It's going to be a tough winter for sure, given that we've said to South Africans already, and I'm going to repeat that, we're going to take 18 months to 2 years to fix load shedding. It's very clear. There's no shortcut. As of 31st March, we're looking at edging closer to, as best as possible, a 60% energy availability factor. As of 31st March 2024, our forecast is 65% energy availability. And as of 31st March 2025, we'll get to 70%. So it's a process that requires two things to happen. It requires that as we do our best to fix the plant, we also do our best in the broader South Africa Inc. to add more megawatts onto our grid.
Yeah.
What can we do? Firstly, all of us, including in this studio and other places, we need to start putting energy efficient lightings in all our places. We've seen that in 2010, 2011 when we did the FIFA World Cup. We saved an equivalent of 2 levels of load staging through demand side management.
Yeah.
So all of us have to play our fair part in this. Secondly, between government, this time as a property owner, and private sector entities as property owners, we need to find smart ways of putting rooftop solar onto our roofs, because these big corporate buildings and these government head office buildings are, in essence, virtual power stations that are underutilized. We saw this in the countries such as Vietnam, which struggled with severe power shortages like us. They managed to put as much as 3,000 megawatts onto their grid. That's 3 stages of load shedding. Yeah. So we need to find smart ways of putting megawatts onto roof, because then it allows us to do maintenance properly. What triggers load shedding, the part of what we're referring to as unplanned capacity loss factor, is when you don't do maintenance properly, you rush to get power plants to get on stream. Then you get tube leaks, you get a whole host of trips because you rushed through a predetermined engineering process because you're rushing to keep the lights on.
Well, part of what someone like Dr. Mate, an engineer by trade, who sat exactly where you are, said to us a few months ago that for these plants at Eskom to work optimally, you have to work with the original plant manufacturers, and in all probability, you will have to outsource the maintenance of these power stations to people such as those, the original plant manufacturers. Is that in the offing?
I think that colleagues in society, such as those you mentioned, are better advised to know that when you offer an analysis, you always must make sure it is anchored in truth and fact. I would encourage such professionals to engage with our Rotec industries. We have all the internal capabilities at Rotec. Thousands of engineers and technicians are there manufacturing these very components that we're talking about. And so we don't have to, in most instances, outsource anything to anybody. All we need is agility on their part. All we need is leadership at the top in the form of the generations executive, in the form of the people who do procurement, intra-procurement, to make sure that those manufacturing processes are fast-tracked. In fact, yesterday we looked at how this can be done as the board. We had a whole day review, organizational review of Eskom. And we're quite convinced that actually We've got more of these capabilities than we actually realize. We just need to fast-track their delivery.
Who's going to do that when you are going to take months searching for a CEO? You've just said that it's going to take a couple of months to get the group chief executive.
The mistake we make, Mr. Mngambi, is that we always tend to personalize leadership in individuals. Let's shy away from that. Currently, we have men and women on the executive committee of Eskom that can do this. We have the head of the Eskom Rotec Industries, who's a seasoned industrialist himself, an engineer, who can do this. He's got an executive committee at Rotec doing this. We have the interim head of generation, who is also a seasoned engineer in Eskom. And he's been doing a good job since he took over from Mr. Roland Matebula, who left Eskom a few months ago. Thomas is his name. He's been doing a good job in actually turning some of the stability we're seeing is this new pair of hands that are now on the surface.
Mr. Makwana, I'm going to respectfully disagree with you.
I think that Mr. Mngambi, we must guard against hero-worshipping individuals. Individuals play a significant role as leaders, but the key thing that sustains you is the institutional capacity that is built. It is the capabilities that are built, in this case, the technical capabilities. And those technical capabilities are there. They just haven't been led well. And that's the dilemma we face.
I'll tell you why I'm disagreeing vehemently with what you're saying. I don't think that there has been an improvement, and that's purely on the basis of experiencing load shedding. We are rotating from stage 4, stage 5, and when the situation really gets worse, we go into stage 6 and we stay there. So I'm not sure how much improvement Thomas Conradi has brought in there. Maybe let's deal with that.
I think we must learn to do something else as well. In these periods, we must also celebrate the times when we've had lower levels of load shedding. And there have been many of those when we've been on stage 3 and stage 2. We must not just lament the stage 8 and stage 7. There's been days when we've had consequent days of stage 3s and stage 2s. And again, if we want this thing to change, celebrate those things that people like Thomas Conradi are fixing. Celebrate those things that people like Bedi Nxumalo at Eskom Rotec Industries are fixing. Then we encourage them to do more.
You've met with the Minister of Electricity?
Yes.
And based on those discussions, what stood out for you as key points that you think he is going to help turn the situation around, which his predecessors may not have been able to do?
So firstly, the Minister of Electricity doesn't have a predecessor. It's the first time we've had a Minister of Electricity in our country.
I accept that.
And so we have to, firstly, I met with him. I know him from prior roles that he's fulfilled. I'm comfortable that he's got the inclination, the aptitude, the energy to work with us. And most importantly, because he's an engineer, he will also perhaps see things we don't see. Because when you're in the middle of the problem, you do suffer blind spots. So we welcome working with him and welcome and look forward to working with him.
But he's a civil engineer.
It doesn't matter. An engineer is an engineer.
Okay.
Because you will know that as a process of solving this problem, engineers are about following processes. And that's why I'm saying to you, don't look only at certain uncomfortable outcomes. We are comfortable because we're seeing the requisite discipline in terms of engineering processes, maintenance, technical maintenance processes being followed quite diligently to get us to a better place. And so we will give him all the support that he needs and ensure that together we find ways of fixing load shedding.
As a final question, I'll go back to the appointment of the GCE. Months doesn't give us timelines. Same as you couldn't give me a direct response as to just how bad things are going to get. Although, evidently, we can see that it's going to be a tough winter, given the stages we are rotating between. So, are you able to give a month, perhaps, as to when Eskom can confirm a group CEO?
No, I can't, for the simple reason that these processes are driven by governance. I must still go and account to a board in terms of this week on Monday, Tuesday. We met as the nominations committee with the search firm. I've not even said with the board to say this is what the search firm told us, this is the dates, this is the project plan. So I can't now on television govern by television. I must still go and sit with my board and inform the board that this is where we are, and inform the board that in a matter of months, not many months, matter of short months, based on that project plan, this is where we believe we will be. Now, why I also can't is because I don't know who the preferred candidate is going to be among those men and women, very illustrious men and women, by the way, who have applied for the chief executive role. Because some people are on 3 months notice. Some people are on 6 months notice. And in some instances, God forbid, they're on a year notice.
How big is your shortlist?
A huge, very impressive shortlist.
How big?
So, no, I can't.
10 people, 20 people?
I'm not going to do that. I'm on television. I can't do governance by television. Suffice to say, we've got a rich list. It will, when the time is right, and believe me, when the time is right, we will come here and say, this is the person that is going to join. And I'm comfortable that it should be very soon. But I'm not going to here violate governance and start discussing board matters when I shouldn't.
Let me thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Mpho Makwana, thank you. All right, hopefully you are going to join us again in the not too distant future to talk to us about how much progress has been made in the many things that we have discussed. Well, thank you very much. I hope you have learned a thing or two about the processes that are ongoing at Eskom.